Today we're talking about the best updated graphics settings for Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2. So we're going to be covering the best in-game settings, along with some settings on your monitor and screen as well. And we start with on-demand texture streaming. Generally you want this enabled. It essentially enhances all the visuals just that little bit. So we're talking about high quality textures and the color detailing. Of course, because this isn't preloaded data straight onto the game and it is streamed, you do have to be mindful of how much bandwidth that is taking up. So if you are lagging or you haven't got a great connection, then maybe switch this off. For world motion blur, weapon motion blur, I recommend turning these off. I always say they kind of look cool maybe if you're playing campaign, but in multiplayer where you're up against real players and you're just trying to be the best you can be, you want them off just so you can see better. And the same goes for film grain. Turn this all the way down to 0. Depth of field, also switch this off. This makes it so when you aim in, nothing around your aim is blurred. If it was switched on, that would be the case. Then for fidelityfx CAS, I recommend switching this on and all the way up to 80 to 100 if you're on the next gen consoles. So we're talking about Xbox Series X and S and PS5. If you're on the older gen consoles, I recommend turning it on, but only to about 20 or even switching it off completely. So the point of this feature is that you can sharpen images on the screen, but without putting too much load on your processor. Basically meaning that you can see things really clearly and crisply on the screen, but you're not going to lose any frames or performance. That being said, on the newer gen consoles, you can go to a higher strength, like I said, but on the older gen consoles, you can get some distortion. Now, just before we get into the rest of the settings, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, GearUp, and their new HyperRev game acceleration router. The HyperRev improves your connection to servers, reducing your ping, packet loss, and ultimately your lag, which can be one of the most frustrating issues we face as gamers. The stabilization of ping is especially important during peak hours, and this is where you'll really see the HyperRev come into its own. It also features high-performance patented antennas, which provide better Wi-Fi coverage, ensuring lower latency and packet loss on Wi-Fi as well as when it's wired too. To set it up, you simply connect the HyperRev to the internet, then connect whichever device you're gaming on to the router, either by Wi-Fi or wire, then head over to the mobile app, where you can select your console and game that you want to boost. We know how important a better connection can be in Warzone, so as you can see here, before using the GearUp HyperRev booster, my latency is way higher. Then when using it, it drops by over 50, giving me a much more responsive experience. The GearUp HyperRev really does make getting a better gaming connection easy. If you want to check out GearUp's HyperRev booster, you can head over to the link in the description below. And with code 15SPRINGLEAF, you can get 15% off. But now let's get back to the settings. And we have 120Hz refresh rate, so this is applicable to newer gen consoles, and of course we want this switched on, as essentially this means 120 frames per second, but to have this on you do need a monitor or screen which can run it as well. For field of view, this is a personal choice, but in my opinion you have to go 100 or above. I've gone for 120 here, which is the maximum it can be, which allows me to see an incredible range around me, but some people think 120 means that objects in the distance are a little bit too small to see. So that's kind of the trade-off there. If you do think that, maybe try 110. Then for ADS field of view, put this on affected. This makes it so when you aim in, you're still at the field of view setting that you've just applied. So if mine's 120 normally, when I aim in, it's still 120. Alternatively, on independent, you'll aim in at 80 FOV, which can be a nice solution to the problem of people in the distance being too small, but there is a chance that when you're aiming in, you just miss other things going on around you. For weapon field of view, put this on wide. This just makes the weapon look smaller, which means you can see more of the environment. For camera movement, put this on least, which is 50%. I don't want you to get motion sickness or miss anything going on around you. For brightness, I actually run 70 now. This is quite a bit higher than the default, but I find with the other settings we're going to get into, it just makes all of the maps on Warzone 2 at the moment pop a lot more than they did. So obviously, Ashika Island is quite a bit darker than Al Mazrah, but you don't want to be changing your settings every time you go on one map or the other. So 70 is quite a nice balance. It makes Ashika Island nice and bright, but doesn't saturate Al Mazrah completely. For safe area, go as narrow as you can. This just refers to your HUD and on-screen information, and that includes your minimap. And bringing your minimap closer to the center of the screen means that your eyes don't have to track as far as they otherwise would. So if you're like me, you're probably constantly checking that minimap to see where your teammates are, see where enemies are on the UAV, and obviously if that's quite far away, you are going to miss certain things that are happening around you and maybe react slower to enemies being there. So reducing this distance is very good. In addition to the graphics in-game settings, we want to go to interface, and specifically color customization. We have a few options here for the filter, and I do recommend filter 2. These are preset color customization settings, and to be honest, they're actually very good. They're a very simple way to make the map just look a lot better immediately, and because of that I do recommend turning the intensity all the way up to 100. Now these are the best in-game graphics settings we have available to use on Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2, but of course our screens and monitors have a bunch of inbuilt settings too, which can make the game look and feel even better. Everyone's monitors will be slightly different, but some general advice I can give is to try out the predetermined modes which some offer. Some have modes for watching films, playing racing games, etc. Some will even have first-person shooter modes, and generally that will be pretty good for us. On top of that though, make sure any blur settings are disabled, the refresh rate is as high as it can be, and the sharpness and contrast are adjusted. Generally these settings give it the real premium feeling, and the standard settings aren't perfect. So turning them up slightly and seeing what looks best to you is a great option to have. Doing this alongside the in-game settings should really get the maps popping. Then on top of this we have the HDR settings, which increase your color dynamic range. Now previously on some consoles this did reduce your frames per second, so obviously we don't want that, we want to prioritize that if anything. But try turning HDR on, since it is going to make the game look much better. Then make sure you've got the 120Hz enabled. If it does switch it off, just turn the HDR off and go back to 120Hz. Now doing all this alongside the in-game settings should really get the maps popping on Call of Duty generally, whether that's Warzone, multiplayer, campaign or DMZ. And now that you are finished here, why don't you check out the best audio settings or even the best free skins on offer in Warzone 2 right now.